Darrion Williams withdraws from the NBA draft, setting up a bidding war between Bill Self and Will Wade.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Wednesday, and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host for today's show, Andy Patton, joined today by our regular guest and the host of the Locked On College Basketball Game Night Show, Leif Thulin. We want to thank all of you for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Remind you that you can check out this show ad-free on Amazon Music, and give a special shout out to those everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. Today, we're talking about a couple of big-time moves in college basketball that happened early on Tuesday. Darrion Williams withdrawing from the NBA draft. There are already two teams considered the frontrunners to land his services. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about Boogie Fland making it official and committing to the Florida Gators, what that might look like. Is Boogie making the right decision? How does that backcourt between Fland and Xavian Lee end up working for Todd Golden's club? And then we're going to close out the show talking about another move in the Big 12, or a move in the Big 12, I should say. Wes Miller committing to Cincinnati happened late last week. We're going to talk about Miller going to the Bearcats and what that might mean for Coach Wes Miller's club. Leif, we start with the big news, though, Darrion Williams. I don't think this was entirely unexpected. There's kind of a handful of players that we're still sort of waiting to see what decision they're going to ultimately make as the withdrawal deadline for the NBA draft is about 7 days away, a week out, as many of you are listening to this show. But Darrion Williams decided he'd rather play college basketball for one more year than be what I assume would have been somewhere in the mid to late second round of this upcoming draft. Leif, as somebody who follows the NBA draft pretty closely, kind of looking at Williams, he measures at 6'4.5" without shoes on, which I think was a pretty significant factor for him deciding to come back to school. What did you think about his decision to end up coming back to school rather than staying in the draft process?
I expected him to come back to school. I thought it was a little short-sighted to put the name in the transfer portal as hastily as he did, considering that they paid so much for his teammates and were willing to pay money back in Lubbock for him. That would have been an incredibly fun team, but obviously you don't know the extenuating circumstances that create the want to go into the transfer portal. I expected him to declare for the draft after a really good March Madness, but I did not expect him to stick because, I mean, 6'4.5" you may not have anticipated, but you certainly didn't anticipate a guy with that body type being a riser at the combine unless he played incredibly in the scrimmages. And so the drills really hurt his stock. As for the news of Kansas or NC State, I'm not shocked. I'd heard the rumblings for a while. I'm bothered as someone who loved Texas Tech before last season. I had them in my preseason rankings in the top 15. I had them as, hey, this is a Sweet 16 Elite 8 type team. They were moments away from making the Final Four. I really love Grant McCasland. He was one of the key reasons I believe that they were a Sweet 16 Elite 8 team before the season. He was the key reason that they got that far. I'm sad that team's falling apart. So to answer your question, or all of the questions in there, I am not surprised by what happened. I'm not surprised by him declaring and then leaving. I would say Kansas is probably the favorite because Kansas usually can pay a lot of money and showcase wings who can put the ball on the deck and score in multiple ways. But who knows? Will Wade's always had a way of getting people to go to wherever he's been, LSU, McNeese. It doesn't really matter. Will Wade's found guys. So either way, he's going to be showcased prominently.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point, and one that I think is frustrating for teams right now. And I don't know what exactly the solution is, but in an era where you can't really afford to wait around for players to make decisions anymore. I mean, you have to backfill roster spots, and you have to, again, if Williams could have not entered the transfer portal and made this same decision and would have just withdrawn and returned to Texas Tech. And in that spot, I doubt Texas Tech would have gone out and got LaJuan Watts from Washington State or Tyree Bryan from Santa Clara, two players that I saw quite a bit last year following the WCC. They're incredibly talented. Neither of them are as individually talented as Darrion Williams necessarily, but Bryan's an electric outside shooter who can light it up, and LaJuan Watts has a ton of different skills. But again, Texas Tech probably doesn't go get 2 6'5" wings, highly regarded wings out of the transfer portal if they thought Darrion Williams was going to come back. But once he entered the portal and the draft, they had to fill those spots. They did not have a choice. And they spend big money to keep JT Toppin, of course. They spend presumably big money on those guys and some of the other players they got coming in this transfer portal class. And so for Williams, even if he wants to go back to Texas Tech, I don't think at this point they can afford financially to bring him back. And also it creates a roster crunch that, they had to fill those spots. Like they didn't have a choice. So it's an interesting dynamic, and it's a challenge that a lot of teams are going through that, again, I don't know what the solution is necessarily, but again, teams can't afford to wait around. And so for Williams, again, it sucks that he doesn't get to go back to Texas Tech. For us as fans who wanted to see this Texas Tech team, potentially be excellent next year, but maybe he didn't have any intention of going back to Texas Tech. Maybe the fit, he didn't feel good about it. And certainly you can't complain when your two options are Kansas and NC State, especially an NC State team that's probably going to make some noise this year under Coach Will Wade. I'm with you on Kansas being the obvious pick here in the sense that this is the kind of player that Bill Self really likes. We've seen this with, a Kevin McCullough or Jalen Wilson in the previous years. And I could see this really working for him. I do wonder the fit on this current roster for Kansas. Obviously, they've lost pretty much all of their wings from last year. Most of them were graduates. A few of them hit the portal again, like AJ Storr, and Zeke Mayo's gone, and others are gone as well, Rylan Griffin. But they add Trey White from Illinois, 6'7", who's kind of a similar position. They add some other kind of 6'4", 6'5" guards in the transfer portal. They also, of course, are bringing in Darren Peterson, the second most highly regarded prospect in this recruiting class outside of AJ Dibansa. Elmarco Jackson's back. Like, there's kind of a lot of players already at that 2-3 spot. Certainly, I think Darrion Williams is good enough that somebody would just get benched, or one of the transfers might re-enter the portal, or even one of the freshmen might decide to reopen their recruitment. But it definitely strikes me as a good fit for Williams in the sense that Kansas likes this type of player, but there's not a lot of room on the roster. And I think that's, again, kind of the risk of suddenly becoming available at this point in the offseason. A lot of teams have already filled a lot of those roster spots. Do you think this still works for him at Kansas, and they'll just find a way to make the pieces all fit together just because of the talent that he has?
Well, yeah, Darrion Williams is a little different than some of the other guys they've recruited in recent years, where they feel like they've over-recruited a certain position. Like, you look at AJ Storr, Rylan Griffin. At a point, they even had Riley Kugel as well. And then you have some of these already guys in there. But those guys are slashers, except for Griffin. Griffin is the only one that's a spot-up guy. So they didn't really quite fit. And Zeke Mayo is the best of the bunch, but you just didn't know as much because he was from South Dakota State. I'm not saying that they didn't, but many did not perceive that they were like, oh, well, that's not going to fit. But you know what? We got 4 of the wings, and that's going to fix everything. Because last year it was just Johnny Furphy. Jacob Furphy's coming in this year. Right. So you look at all these renditions of the Kansas teams in the transfer portal, and you say, well, that's the best team because they got the best player, Hunter Dickinson, in the portal. And then they have, Kevin McCullough, who is a really established, very good basketball player from Texas Tech, ironically enough. And so you could redo that and you say, hey, he's well-schooled, he fits a lot of molds. But in the previous renditions, there's been a skill gap in terms of what they're trying to fill, or they've overfilled a certain skill and not contributed enough to the shooting aspect. I think this year, Bill Self is going to go for players that are good basketball players, and Darrion Williams is that. He is not someone that is, hey, you know what, this is what you have been, now you have to fit this role. No, Darrion Williams has already played a role. He played next to a second-team All-American in T. Toppin. He played next to a pass-first point guard with Hawkins, as well as a budding star and Christian Anderson. Like, he knows how to play a role, but he can star in his role and take over a game. He's got versatility to play in the post. He can shoot nearly 40% from three. He rebounds the ball at a high clip, passes out of the post. This is a guy that I don't think has any of those roster issues. And so to conclude, basically, you're going to start him if they do get him and figure the rest out. and figure out what works around he and Darren Peterson best. And that's the way I see it. I think that's why Kansas is the favorite, because they're going to give him that liberty to say, you know what, you're going to get paid a lot. You're going to be prominently displayed next to a guy who's going to get scouted every single night. The attention will be taken off of you, and you can still be a star in this league and be a Big 12 first teamer again.
We're going to move on. We're going to talk about Boogie Fland. We've talked about him quite a bit in the last couple of weeks here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, but now it is official that he is going to Florida to play for Todd Golden and the defending champion Gators. We're going to talk about whether we think that's the right choice for him and how this backcourt might shake out between him and Princeton transfer Xavian Lee. All that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA playoffs are in full swing. Conference finals getting underway just now. Every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on all the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live during the contest. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And right now on FanDuel, Florida plus 1,500 odds to win the 2026 National Championship. If you think Alex Condon's coming back, and you know Boogie Fland, Ruben Chinyelu is already back, you know Xavian Lee's in the mix, you might want to throw some money down. And if you're new to FanDuel, it is the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you will get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Leif, segment 2 here. Still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast, and we're still talking about players who have withdrawn from the NBA draft. We talked about Darrion Williams, who made headlines on Tuesday for taking his name out of the draft and being pursued by Kansas, and Will Wade and the NC State Wolfpack. And now we're going to talk about Boogie Fland, who it was about a week ago that he pulled his name out of the NBA draft process. It was kind of one of the first bigger names to decide to officially return to school. He, of course, also entered the transfer portal and opted to play at Florida. And I want to talk about the Boogie Fland, Xavian Lee backcourt in a second, but basically, Leif, it seems like Boogie kind of had 3 choices. He could either go to the NBA draft and just stick it out and see where it takes him, see where he gets drafted. I think he would have been drafted somewhere at least in the second round. He could have stayed at Arkansas, continued to develop there, kind of expected, hey, with John L. Davis moving on, maybe there's a bigger role for me next year. At least there's not going to be as many cooks in the kitchen like there were last year. And he ultimately decides to not do either of those things and instead transfer to Florida. Do you feel like this is the best case scenario for Fland out of those 3 options in terms of his development as a basketball player and potential future NBA player? Or do you think maybe he should have made a different decision?
Yeah, I found the Boogie Fland saga puzzling altogether, because if you think about Arkansas, that was the guy that I thought was better than DJ Wagner at his time there. And then he got hurt and Arkansas got better, so it reflected poorly on Boogie. Then he says, I'm all in on the NBA draft. And you say, well, dude, like you didn't play much. And when you were playing, your team was losing. Like what does that do for your stock as a diminutive guard who was not particularly efficient? Like the comparison would have been to Calipari's previous point guard, Rob Dillingham. And you'd say, okay, great. But Rob Dillingham was second team all SEC and the most dynamic player in that entire conference. Yeah. So what is he trying to do there? And Rob Dillingham was buried on the bench in year 1 as a diminutive guard. Anyway, I say all that to say this. He goes to the draft, and you don't think that he's going to blow it out of the water athletically, because he's going to test in very slight, and he's going to have to shoot unbelievably and play unbelievably in scrimmages to push himself out. And he doesn't showcase himself there. So I figured by the end of it, like the draft process as it neared, that he was coming back. And I didn't think he was going to Arkansas, because Arkansas had kind of recruited over him. And in the time where he was out, and I know he came back in the NCAA tournament when they did ultimately put their best basketball forward, but it was DJ Wagner's team at that point. So I saw Florida come into the mix, and I was the highest on Florida of anyone around, because I loved their bigs. I loved Walter Clayton. I liked what they had together. Florida's bringing together a weird team, because they're going to have a small forward who I adore, and Thomas Houck, to me, be the linchpin and be their best player. But Xavian Lee is a ball-in-hand guard who's not particularly big or sturdy. Like, he's not like Elijah Martin, though he's not tall. But he's one of the most physically imposing defenders. He's not like Will Richard, who, though he's not huge at the small forward position last year, Will Richard was athletic, could shoot the ball. He's a 5th-year senior. Xavian Lee is a point guard who's slight of build, though he's a little bit taller. Then you bring in Boogie Fland, who's a point guard who's slight of build. I think it's redundant. I don't like this fit whatsoever, either for the Gators or for Boogie Fland. I mean, maybe he's better than Xavian Lee, but then what's the purpose of recruiting both of them? I don't like this fit at all. I'm now a Gators fan. I had to be because they proved me right too many times. My boy Thomas Houck, Alex Condon might be coming back. Chinyelu's already back. I like this team, and I don't like this fit at all. So I'm actually frustrated about it.
Yeah, I think I'm with you, and I understand exactly. I think you made the perfect point, and the point that I was going to make too, which is a lot of people look at last year's Florida team and they see, well, they started 3 guards and it worked great. It's like, yeah, those guards fit the role that they needed to fit on that roster. Elijah Martin's not a ball dominant guard. Will Richard's not a ball dominant guard. They never were, and so they had this great elite on-ball guard in Walter Clayton Jr., and then they had 2 other tremendously talented guards, but who didn't need to be on the ball, who didn't need the ball in their hands consistently to be successful. And so now you have this, and Florida was pretty clearly in the mix. They wanted this. Not only do they want Boogie Fland, but before they landed Boogie Fland, they were heavily in the mix for Desmond Claude. I assume they're no longer in the mix for Claude. It would make 0 sense to bring him in along with this backcourt because Desmond Claude is also an on-ball, ball-dominant guard. But the fact that they were pursuing Claude so heavily after landing Xavian Lee tells me that they had the intention of having 2 very ball-dominant guards in this system. And I don't know what that means necessarily. I will say, as somebody who watched Todd Golden's San Francisco teams before he took the Florida job, they tended to have that quite a bit. Jamari Bouye and Khalil Shabazz were both tremendously talented kind of ball dominant guards in that system, but this is not what Florida had last year, and that was the best team that they've had. I mean, that was Todd Golden's best team. Obviously they won a championship, so it does feel a bit interesting. And for Fland, I would think going to a team that already has somebody who's going to fill that role would kind of be the opposite of what you'd want to do because of the frustration of what happened to him last year. Again, when he was playing, he did have the ball in his hands a lot, but Arkansas wasn't very good. And then when he was hurt, that's when they got better because there wasn't as many players who needed that ball in their hands. So I'm a little confused. I think from a talent perspective, if you're Florida and you can get a player as talented as Boogie Fland, I get why you pursue him, but I don't love the fit. And I'm curious if Golden or the staff sees something about either Fland, or maybe they think that, again, with the pursuit of Claude and then Fland, maybe they like Lee off the ball more than we're expecting. That would surprise me a little bit. I mean, he was at Princeton, so he was the best player on the floor in basically every game he played. So of course he had the ball in his hands a lot. Maybe they think he can play off the ball a little bit more, but it's not going to be the same type of backcourt as last year where Martin and Richard were just so good at filling their off-ball roles. And I am intrigued, curious. I don't want to say optimistic because I'm a little skeptical of how this will work, but I am intrigued to see what Todd Golden's got up his sleeve with these 2 guys in the mix.
Well, they need dynamism more than they did last year because obviously Walter Clayton was their best player, and I never hid from that. But my piece that sold me on the Gators was their front court. In terms of how they work together, I thought was even better than their backcourt, even though they had the second best player in the country at times in Walter Clayton Jr., right? So, as much as Elijah Martin was a defensive ace and Will Richard knocked down huge shots, there was so much ball handling and dynamism put on the shoulders of Walter Clayton. You need to replace it somehow, and not one player could do so. So I understand that. The other thing is Alex Condon was their secondary initiator. So should Alex Condon not come back, though the rumbles that I'm hearing tell me that he likely will, but if he does not, then who's going to help initiate the offense? Therefore, you might need another guard. And like you astutely pointed out, you look at those San Francisco teams, they had 2 diminutive guards that handled pressure and were good athletes. The thing is, those were WCC teams.
Right.
and the SEC, having a guy like Boogie Fland, who's like 165 pounds soaking wet, doesn't necessarily work when you're guarding against guys like Carter Knox, who'll be the 2 guard for Arkansas. And I just think that they're going to have enormous size. Thomas Houck's going to be their starting 3, Ruben Chinyelu and probably Alex Condon, 3, 4, 5. So you need scoring, you need dynamism, ability to slash, or else you're a little too regimented. And you have to replace the amazing shooting of Walter Clayton. I just don't personally love the fit. I actually like the idea of Desmond Claude, because I think he's a guy who puts a ton of pressure on the rim, gets free throws. And though his shooting numbers were not particularly great, he can play off the ball and use the threat of having someone else there, not just him, to have open shots and then attack closeouts. I like that fit a lot more than the Boogie Fland one, despite I really liked Boogie Fland coming into Arkansas. And I thought he was the better guard between he and DJ Wagner in that season before he got hurt. So this is not much of a Boogie Fland dislike. I just don't like the fit for Florida. That said, I've loved Todd Golden for a long, long time, ever since I watched him beat Virginia. He was ranked number 4. And then they made the tournament. That was a team that was so well coached. They play Murray State in that thriller of a game. Todd Golden, I've had tabs on for a long, long time, and they won a national championship. I'm not going to doubt his process, but I don't necessarily see the fit as much as he and the coaching staff clearly do.
Yeah, Claude's listed at 6'5", and I think that's the biggest difference too. He is an initiator, but he is much better at getting to the rim than Fland, who really struck. I mean, you shot like 38% at the rim last year, which is, I mean, you think, okay, in the SEC for a small guard, sure, but like most of his games were not against SEC teams. He got hurt early in the conference season. So yeah, I'm skeptical that he's suddenly going to be way better at that. And so having the two smaller guards, it'll be a bit of a question for how this works for Florida. But talent tends to rise to the top, and Todd Golden's got plenty of it on this roster next year. Leif, I want to move on. Kind of go back to the Big 12. We talked about Darrion Williams and potentially going to Kansas from Texas Tech. And I want to talk about another addition in the Big 12 in Baba Miller. This happened late last week, so we're a little late on it, but still want to talk about what this Cincinnati team looks like with Baba Miller in the mix and whether Wes Miller can put the pieces together to contend in the Big 12. And if not, how much longer he might end up being the head coach in Ohio. We're going to talk about all that coming up in just a second. All right, Leif, closing out the show, back to the Big 12, talking about the commitment of Baba Miller, former Florida State and Florida Atlantic forward, going to Cincinnati to play for Wes Miller and the Bearcats. Baba Miller's been an interesting case. He's been a guy who's been on the NBA draft radar since he was a freshman at Florida State, and he's played 3 years of college basketball, and he hasn't been bad necessarily, but he hasn't really been great either. He was injured for most of his first year with the Noles, only played 15 games, then was much better as a sophomore at Florida State, but still only averaged about 7.5 points, 5 boards, just not a high-level scorer. Transfers to FAU to go play for their new coach, John Jackas, who took over for Dusty May. Had the best season of his college basketball career for the Owls, 11.5 points, 7 boards, about 3 assists, also averaged nearly 2 blocks per game. Was very, very efficient, just under 60% on 2-pointers, 34.5% from the 3-point land. 6'11" big, super long, rangy, kind of small forward type with his length, with his size, his shot blocking ability. That's why he's been an NBA draft prospect for so long. But the scoring, the kind of offensive game just hasn't materialized to really put him back on that draft radar. Now he goes to Cincinnati. He goes to a tough conference in the Big 12. He goes to a team that's kind of had players like this in the past, kind of long, rangy, athletic wing types. Dylan Mitchell comes to mind, who was just on that Cincinnati team. What do you think, I guess more broadly, what do you think about Baba Miller as like a still draft prospect, or if that's kind of out of the door for him at this point? And what do you think about the fit with him joining the Bearcats?
Well, Baba Miller, before he had some, I wouldn't say legal issues, but just the legal of the NCAA, preventing him from coming to Florida State initially, I had thought could be a lottery pick, just in terms of the tools. And that was not the craziest thing. Many people said, okay, get this guy playing a couple games, salivating over those natural tools. And then, like you said, he played those 15 games. He was a little better his sophomore year, but the sophomore year, being a little better, you expected the sophomore year being a lot better. You expected 15-7, not 7-3, or whatever it ended up being.
Yeah.
And so, to me, he goes to FAU and transfers down. So that rarely works. Like, there are select exceptions that work. Like Brandon Podunski goes from Illinois to Santa Clara and shows out. But that rarely works, because it means that the skill development at the highest level doesn't show, and therefore you're probably more reliant on athleticism on the lower level.
Yeah.
And I think that's what he's doing. I think he's going to be a good athlete. Like, Cincinnati has had good athletes. They had Arrington Page and Dylan Mitchell in the front court last year. They had the big fella from
Bendago.
Yeah. You have athletes. He's going to be a dime a dozen there. And I don't mean that in the disrespectful term to the players that were there prior or for him, but I don't think he stands out as anything different than just a good athlete in the front court for Cincinnati. I think his best attributes when you looked at him, like when he was coming out of Spain, were, oh, this guy's very fluid. He can pass the ball. Now I think he's just pigeonholed into this athletic 4-man that's got size to play the 5, but he's got the mobility that maybe can guard the 3, and he's somehow in between all of the above. And so I think he's going to fit in. I think he'll play a role, but I don't think you're going to see him on any all Big 12 categories, even for the defense. I think there's a little bit more of potential versus production.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good assessment. And Bob Miller, he's just he goes down to FAU, and the American Athletic Conference is fine. It's fine, and I just think he out-athleted everybody down there. And, obviously he was at a school that gave him a real opportunity to play. He played 30 minutes a game last year and got more opportunities to score. I mean, he took more field goal attempts last year than he did at Florida State by a pretty significant amount. So he gets more opportunities. Of course, the numbers are better. It was nice to see him shoot the 3 ball pretty well, 34%, not elite, but good for a 6'11" guy. But now he kind of, I think you're right in that he probably just kind of disappears at Cincinnati a little bit. I mean, they've had guys, you mentioned Arrington Page and Aziz Bendigo and Dylan Mitchell, and then Dan Skillings was another guy who's just like these good athletic 3-4 types. You'll see guys play well at Cincinnati, but I think Miller is going to have a fine season. But yeah, I don't think he's going to be all Big 12. I don't think he's going to be all Big 12 defensive team. I don't think he's going to light up NBA draft stuff. I could see him getting maybe a G League elite camp invite, something like that. But I think that the days of him being an NBA draft prospect are probably in the rearview mirror. But who knows? Maybe Cincinnati can unlock something here. Maybe he can find a way. I mean, anybody who's 6'11" who can space the floor and block shots is going to get some level of attention. And he has proven he can do that. Not super consistently, but he has proven he can do that. I want to kind of talk about this from a Cincinnati perspective a little bit as well, because this is a team that the last couple of years, they've had some pedigree, some upside, some kind of perceived like, hey, this is a team that could make some noise in the Big 12. They got some talent last year. They got a lot of attention for basically bringing back their entire starting lineup. And it hasn't really worked. They weren't very good last year. Wes Miller's kind of went from being this like darling coach of like, ooh, could North Carolina contact him? Could so-and-so team contact him to, fill their head coaching job? To now it's like, is Wes Miller on the hot seat at Cincinnati? Like life comes at you fast. And I think that's the status for Wes Miller at this point. And I'm looking at a transfer portal class that I like the talent that's joining the Cincinnati team. I'm not sure I love all the fits. You got Kirk Kriisa coming over from Kentucky. Obviously, Kirk Kriisa missed most of last year, but is a talented player who was previously at West Virginia. You get Jalen Celestine, a hot 3-point shooter from Baylor, Sincere Harris from West Virginia, Mustafa Tiam from Central Florida, basically everybody coming from the Big 12 over to Cincinnati. And then you got Jalen Haynes from George Mason. They got some freshmen coming in as well, but their only real returner is Jizzle James, who's very good. But I just see this roster construction, and I'm not sure how all the pieces are going to fit together. And even if they do, I mean, a lot of these guys, again, 3 of them came directly from the Big 12, and Celestine, Harris, and Tiam, and Kriisa played in the Big 12 in the past. So you got guys who filled roles in the Big 12 previously, but I don't know that this roster is necessarily filled with enough star power or high-level talent to be particularly competitive in the Big 12, unless somebody like Bob Miller just explodes or Jizzle James explodes. But I'm not sure I'm seeing it. Does this look on paper at this point, knowing that it's late May, so there's still a lot of time left? Does this look like a team that you have a lot of confidence going into the Big 12 season in?
No, I think they're middle of the pack. But what's interesting is this team reads the exact same as last year's team to me, except they don't have the 2 most proven players, Simas Lukosius and Skillings, who, and then Bandego, you could say, was proven, although he had some proving still to do at the higher level. But my point being is everyone had this feeling of this is a darling, like this is the Big 12 sleeper. And I said a little bit of a victory lap in terms of Texas Tech earlier, who I thought was very underrated coming into the season. Well, Texas Tech, and you look at their rosters, Texas Tech had way better basketball players. They just had fewer players that you knew the names of down the depths of their roster. And then even then, you had a guy who, up until the tournament, because Chance McMillan was hurt, and Kerwin Walton, who started his career in North Carolina. Like, that's North Carolina. He was their 7th man. And then Christian Anderson, people won't know about him, but if you're really in the weeds, that guy had some talent. There's some buzz around him. My point being is this team is athletic, but that's no surprise. So was last year's team, and they had better basketball players. I don't think this team makes the tournament. I didn't think the Cincinnati team last year was all that good. I didn't have them ranked top 8. of the Big 12. I think this is a team that's recruiting to style, but not necessarily finding the pieces that recruit and that win in the substance of what their league is. Their league is good. They have skillful players in this league, and they're not going to out athletic everyone because this league is athletic.
Yeah.
I feel like they're trying to out athletic and play like a full court press type of team, and then they don't do it. So I'm out on Cincinnati. I don't like this roster construction. And honestly, I don't think Kirk Reese is that good. I think he's one of the more overrated players in basketball in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Kirk Reese. He's not that great. Tiam didn't do that much at UCF. Baba Miller hardly did anything at his last D1 high major stop. So I think they're recruiting a lot of players. I do like Celestine and Sencire Harris quite a bit, but those are guys that I think should be fourth or fifth players on the team. And those are the two that I think are the most promising on that roster. So I'm out on Cincinnati.
You literally took the last point right from me, which I appreciate. I was going to say Sencire Harris is probably my favorite player on this roster. And if he's Cincinnati's best player, they're not finishing top 12 in the Big 12, to be honest. I think he's a good player, and I think there's a lot of good players on this roster, but there's a lot of third, fourth, fifth option, not even third, there's a lot of fourth, fifth options on this roster, and not enough high level talent or number one scoring options. And again, maybe something breaks and they get a huge addition late. I don't know who that would be or how that might happen. But yeah, I'm pretty out on Cincinnati as well, even though I like the types of players that they recruit. I just don't think it's going to work all together, especially not in the Big 12. But I'm hopeful to see Baba Miller back at the big high major level and see if he can do something, because he's a player I've always liked watching. But I'm a little skeptical of how this is going to go for him in a very physical Big 12 conference. Leif, that's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. I'll be back with you all on Thursday, and then Isaac and I will be back with you on Friday. We'll keep you up to date on anything going on in the transfer portal, NBA draft withdrawals as we get closer to that deadline, about a week out from right now, and we'll keep you up to date on recruiting as the summer circuits get going underway as well. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and as always, peace out.